Hello everybody and welcome back. We are going to continue our work in chapter 2 this week where we were talking about controllers. And if you remember last time we were working with the MVC music store and we built some controllers, and right at the end of the lecture we were able to get to the point where we were using the URL to basically control our application and access different aspects of it. And we're going to pick up and continue our work right where we left off. But before we do that, I'm compelled to talk to you a little bit about versioning your work and file management once again. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to jump over to my Google Drive. And I actually have developed, a folder structure for myself that I use here as a teacher and a faculty member. And typically what I do is I create a folder for my course and then create subfolders for everything that's like a logical breakdown of the work that we do here in class. For this particular semester, I created a folder called Fall 2019 because I go through this course many times over. You might not need to do that. You could probably just do ASP.NET 2, for example, and that might be enough for you. Now, this is the folder here that contains my work. You see how it's titled. And I think it's a really good habit whenever you sit down to a machine and you're working on a coding project to always make a version of your work before you begin so that you can at least go back to where you were prior to starting, just in case something bad happens, or maybe you're in a circumstance as sometimes happens with students in the classroom where they're working on a flash drive or something and they might not bring it with them. And this is just another way to kind of work around that issue. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a copy of this, and all I'm going to do is right click and let's see, they don't even give me that option here, do they? Okay, so let me see if I can pull that down a different way. Fascinating. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do personally. If I was working from my Google Drive, and some of you might do that, especially if you come to the classroom, one way to version the work would be maybe to simply rename this or just download it. That's not a bad approach. You download it to your machine, it'll get zipped up, and then you can unzip it here, and then whatever work you do on a school machine, you can then re-zip it and push it back up to Google Drive and have it there. Or move the whole thing up as one collection of folders. That's really kind of up to you. You see that it will take a little while to zip, and I've already done that process, so I'm actually going to cancel it, but that would be one way that you could work around it. Now, since I run the Google Drive software memory resident on my machine, it does create on my machine a Google Drive file stream folder. If you were using the personal version of Google Drive, you would actually have an icon down in your system tray down here, and unfortunately this is recording my second screen, not my first screen, so I can't show that to you, but if you would click your little up arrow in the system tray, you would see a little Google icon in there for Google Drive, and then that would show you that it's working on your machine. And then you would also have somewhere on your machine a Google Drive folder, and it would probably pop up like my OneDrive or my Creative Cloud files here as kind of a separate resource. And the advantage, of course, of that is it works like a regular folder on your machine, and then every time you save something to the folder, it automatically replicates to the cloud and then pushes down to all of your attached devices as well. So whatever methodology you might happen to use, and even if you use a flash drive, for example, not recommended, but you can, just remember to create versions of your work. And then if you do carry portable media, a really strong suggestion to you is attach it to your keys or attach it to your phone or something, like something you won't forget when you're walking out the door, coming to class or going to do work. All right, so I'm going to come in here into my Python folder, and actually this is not Python, this is ASP.NET 2, sorry about that. Go to my fall folder. It's the same folder we saw in Google Drive. You see the same exact files in there. And then I'm going to make a copy of this. So I just did a right-click copy, and now I'm going to do a right-click paste, and it'll paste the folder back in. And can see it's a fairly large folder. It's 150 megabytes because we have authentication built into the app. So that's one of the reasons it takes a little while. And so we're just letting it right now do the copy. Now, once it gets copied over, it's going to have an addition to the file name, which is going to say, copy of the specific folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the file name when it finally finishes so that it actually includes an indicator of what is in that folder. So for example, I'll say chapter 2 up through a certain page number, and that way I know where I left off. When I finish the chapter, I'll also make a version and call it chapter 2 complete, or rename the folder next time I begin work. And that way I always have that fallback. One thing you should notice as you're doing this is how long it actually takes, because of the size of these projects. When you throw authentication in, they get big, and then the copy, pasting, or zipping can take a little bit longer than what you're used to for most of the programs you've created in the past. So just be aware. If you are using Windows 10 or Windows 8 and they show you these file copy windows, the one thing that a lot of people don't realize is they have this little additional view you can pull up, which is what I was looking at. And what's nice about it is it does give you an estimate as to how much longer it's going to take. And you notice it's not really necessarily a short period of time, because it is processing a lot of little files, and sometimes it takes longer to do that than copying one large file. And because they're all little text files, it has to read all the headers information individually and deal with that as a separate entity. So that process alone can slow you down. Okay, now that the copy is done, and I had paused the video because it can take a while depending on your machine and the size of your project. I'm going to go through the process of doing the rename here. So once again, I'm just right-clicking, choosing rename, and then what I'm going to type here is chapter 2 up through page, and I'm going to have to look at my PDF. I'm going to call it up through page 44. That's where we left off, and I'm going to have to do the rename again because it didn't finish. And this methodology, for as primitive as it is, really can save you a whole lot of heartache. If you forget your portable media, or something happens while you're coding and you really mess things up, and it was working up until this point, and then you did some stuff and it's horribly broken. You maybe deleted something by mistake, or typed the wrong code, or just kind of got lost down the rabbit hole. So that's really kind of a word to the wise. It's kind of like one of these like Murphy's Law kind of things. Like when you forget to do this is when you typically have problems for whatever reason. Like there's something in the back of your brain telling you that, hey, I don't have a backup. This is a great time to mess up. So always err on the side of caution and make backups for yourself as you go. Now when I open up the project, Visual Studio is still going to be attributed back to the original folder, so that's the one I'm going to do my work in. And that's my typical pattern. Remember that what professionals will typically do is they'll leverage source repositories such as services like GitHub. And those services are often tied directly into our IDEs, and Visual Studio is one of those IDEs that can handle that. But there are some complexities with it that I really kind of don't want to spend too much class time on, at least not at this point. So we're just going to kind of press forward and work in this fashion, just because it's quick and easy and gets the job done. I'm going to go ahead and just get that out of the way and close it. And then I'm going to go launch Visual Studio, and that's coming up on my second screen. So you're not seeing my start menu right now or the splash screen. I'm going to see if I can. All right, the splash screen went on screen 2, but the dialogue came up on the main screen here, which is wonderful. I am going to just pull it up via the solution file. It just happens to be the most recent thing I've done in there. This is the only .NET course I'm teaching this semester, so I don't have other classes like throwing a lot of stuff in there. So let's go ahead and open that, and hopefully you can do the same. If you are a student that's working on one of the machines here on campus, you'll actually have to go to wherever you place that file in your file system to do the work. All right, we'll give that a moment to open up. Once again, keep in mind that we're opening up a project that is about 150 megs inside, thanks to all the authentication things that are built in. And if you're curious about that, frankly, why does it take so much? Because we are pulling in a bunch of tools that we won't really be using a lot until the end of the semester manually, but whenever you turn on authentication on a site like this, it automatically develops a database for you, and a bunch of other tools, including the entity framework and all the tools that allow the data to move back and forth, because ultimately those logins are stored in a database attached to the project. And whenever you do that, then you're creating a lot of infrastructure and overhead. All right, one thing I'm going to do here preliminarily, and and kind of as we go through class, I'm going to be showing you like weird little tips like this to kind of give you a little bit of maybe a different approach than what you've accustomed to in the past in terms of working with applications like this. Now, what I really want to do before I do any work is I want to run this, and I want to try what was on the bottom of page 44 again, just to kind of reiterate that whole point of like how we got there and what that really means to us. And then in the process of doing that, what happens is we're going to end up doing what we call a build. Okay, so let me explain what that means to you. When you guys learned how to code in a traditional programming language such as Java, and that's the one that we use in the web program to teach you programming skills, and that is a compiled language. So before you can run your code, you run it through the compiler. Really, your IDE does that, and it builds the code from the text that you've created into what the computer calls bytecode, or instruction sets that the machine can read. And that's a process that takes a little bit of time to like actually create the code. What we can actually do preemptively in Visual Studio is we can build the code without actually running the application, which then when you go to run the application might speed up the launch a little bit. And like the way that you're used to doing it is you just come right up here to the play button, right? And it launches your internal web server, it builds the application, and then it deploys it into the web server. Okay, so it kind of does that automatically. It also, and if you're not aware of this, it also saves all your files automatically too, because you cannot build files that aren't saved. And whenever you're dealing with C# code, which is what we see on the screen right now, it has to be built. In other words, it has to be compiled and stored on the server side of the application prior to deploying the application to the browser. The browser requires that everything is pre-built. Some stuff obviously operates on the fly, but compiled code is what it's all about. So one way you can actually pre-build your code, and also, by the way, look for errors, is to come over here to your Solution Explorer and then click on the root of the project, not the solution at the very top, but the next node down, which is the name of the project itself, corresponds to the folder where it's all sitting. So notice at the very top of that right-click list, look at the option, the top option. It's called Build, okay? And what that does is it goes through all your compilable code, looks for errors, and if there are no errors that are syntax errors, it builds the code and compiles it and creates an executable version of that code in what we call the bin folder. So if you were actually to go back to your file folder, and then go to your application, you're going to notice that there's a folder in here called bin that does not appear in Solution Explorer. You notice that? So Solution Explorer is not a complete folder listing of what's like actually on your file system. What that actually is, it's technically what we call an object explorer. It looks at the things that are inside of your application that are treated as objects or will become objects when the code is compiled and executed. So some stuff will appear and some stuff won't. Sometimes it corresponds to the folders and sometimes it kind of doesn't. But the bin folder, if you explore this and go into it, and you can do that, this shows you all the files that are required to run your application on a Windows server or Windows machine before it can like interact with the web pages. And if you like actually go through here and take a look, you'll notice there's a lot of DLL files and XML files that kind of work together to create the application. Now when I go through and actually do that right click again and actually choose to build, you'll notice down here in the output window it'll say that it's in process, right? And what did it say? What does it say at the very bottom of the screen? I know a lot of people don't notice this when it's done, but it says the build succeeded. That means the application has been created. And then in this folder here, if you refresh and take a look, it's basically all the same stuff. There's maybe a couple things that were updated, but perhaps not. So one thing that developers often do, especially if they have back-end code like this, is they test it before they even push it to a web server by just doing that build. If you run into issues with the application and it like logically it should have worked but it didn't, sometimes what you do is you issue a clean command first. I'll just go ahead and do it because it's not going to hurt anything. And you can see that the clean succeeded too. And what that does for us is it will eliminate a lot of temporary information. So for example, if we have like variables in memory sitting there that might conflict, and sometimes that happens with web applications, the clean pushes things out. The clean also helps us to take care of like unresolved database stuff. So if you had like a database entry that was maybe being written but didn't finish being written, that helps to clean all that stuff out as well. So sometimes that's your little fail-safe for like making sure things work. And if you did, you know, you can do these processes separately. Obviously you can do a clean and then you can do a build, but if you do a rebuild, it cleans it and then builds it. So a lot of developers just kind of do that automatically. I would say there's scenarios I could think of where you want to do these individually, but frankly I'm not thinking of any. So a lot of developers usually go to the rebuild thing and it cleans it and builds it at the same time. Now, not something we'll run into a lot early on, but maybe when we're working with databases at the end a little bit, it'll be kind of a requirement. So good to know, and an interesting little tidbit. So now that we've done that, I'm going to actually go ahead and do the launch here. I want to look at the application. I want to reiterate the stuff we were talking about, controlling your applications via the URL. And right now it is doing the build again, notice, so even though I did it. And if you want, you can always click on this background tasks and it'll actually show you all the little processes it's going through as it's doing it. All right, looks like it's done with the build and it's now launching my browser, which thankfully is coming up on the main screen instead of the second screen. For whatever reason, this configuration here in the classroom is putting my main screen on screen number 2, which I'm not usually in favor of, but that's what it's doing, so I got to kind of deal with it. Now hopefully this process will not take too long. If it is taking what you think is an inordinately long period of time, I will tell you that the reason that's happening is because we do have authentication attached. It's just really as simple as that. So all those components take a long time to demonstrate. When we get past this chapter and start working on this next segment of tutorials, we might even get there tonight with any luck, we're not going to be putting authentication in off the bat, and then the build won't take as long. This is a little bit of a frustrating process, frankly, when you have that build. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but it's like, oh my God, every time I want to run this web page, it's going to take me this long. Well, you have to take into consideration that when you actually take an application like this and you put it and you deploy it on the server, you build it once and then you just let it keep running. There's no reason to rebuild it unless you're like actually changing the application. So that initial fire up time only happens once, and then hypothetically, as long as your server is stable and doesn't have issues or need to restart, it should just stay active. And then it's loaded up in memory on the server and it'll execute really, really quickly. Now, meanwhile, while this is loading, and I know it's taking a little while, I'm going to pause the video and we'll come back as soon as it's active. Minutes. Okay, so now that the application is finally loaded, we created, keep in your memory, a store controller. And the store controller can be accessed basically by adding to the URL store. You just append it to the end, and what that'll do is it will give us the basic view of the store controller, which is the index portion of it that we described last time. And then if I remember right, there was 2 additional entries, and I'm pulling up the book. It was browse and details. That's the little pieces that we want. And so I'm keeping store in the URL, and then you can see here at the bottom that I can trigger browse. I want you to notice how it's actually kind of case insensitive. It's kind of smart that way. And so what this is going to do is it's going to send the application to the store controller and then look for the browse method or function, if you will, and then do whatever that says. And all we're doing with it right now is sending back text to show that we're accessing it. We'll do the same with details. And I know that was in the list here too. And you can see that's going to the details page. So if you managed to get that done so far last time, beautiful. Things are working as they should. Now we're going to take a quick pause here in class while we switch back to the other mode. Okay, folks, now since we all have that working at this point, we're going to continue on to the next little section here. So we're at the bottom of page 45 in our book, and now we're going to learn about how we can actually pass parameters or arguments, if you will, to our applications via the URL. In order for our applications to actually work that way, we do need to actually do some work preemptively to make it work. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and close the browser window here, and then I'm going to stop the application from running. And we are going to start adding some stuff to our controller. So we're going to begin with the browse method. So what we're going to do here is we're going to come down to the browse method, and we're going to append a little bit of information here to the method call. So for right now, notice that the parentheses here at the end of the statement are empty. I mean, it's not expecting any information to come in to trigger whatever it's doing. However, we are going to add something, and if you read the stuff at the bottom of page 45 carefully, they're adding in basically a string variable here for the genre of music. And so what we're going to be able to do from the URL, if you can picture this, is we're going to type, for example, jazz. So the URL will actually read something to the effect of store, browse, there'll be a question mark, the name of the variable equals, and then that will actually trigger it. So what they have is an example as a comment right above this on page 45 as they drop this in. So this will be an example of what the URL will look like. So we'll call the store controller, we'll call the browse method, and then if you're familiar with the use of the question marks in URL passing, this is based upon what we call a get. So that's why we have the keyword get at the beginning of the statement. And when you guys learned how to do form processing in HTML, there were basically 2 methods that you were taught. So like a form would either have a method of get or post, typically. There really are others as well. And you're going to see as we move through the course how those are related to like the CRUD functions of a database. But in this case, a get indicates that whatever we type in the URL and we're passing to the server is visible in plain text in the URL. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to type this just like this into the browser, but that's how it gets passed over. And whenever you're seeing these question marks in there, that's just indicating key value pair separation in the GET when we're sending stuff from the browser, the client, over to the server. That's all that is. So what we need to do now is we need to set up, and you know what, I did paste that in the wrong spot, didn't I? So let's paste it back up here. And we're going to tweak this statement now to do something a little bit different. So I'm going to add a line or two here. And what I'm going to start with is I'm going to set up a variable that's a string, and we'll give it a name of message. Inside there, we're going to type the following method call. And this is a built-in function. And we're just going to use the HTTP utility, which is the one that's highlighted. And then HTML encode. And then in parentheses, you can just copy this right from the book. Yes, you could copy and paste this right from the URL, or right from your PDF, excuse me, if so you choose. That's fine. And then make sure you get your semicolon at the end of the line. So just to really briefly explain what this is going to do, the HTML encode utility is a special utility that allows us to kind of sanitize what we're getting from the user in the browser. All right. Prior to the existence of tools like this in various, like rapid application development systems, like what this is, users often could get kind of crafty, and if they knew that you were, let's say, running a database on the back end, or if they knew that you might have certain JavaScript code available, and they started like hacking through your code and figuring out what methods you have available, they could hypothetically inject JavaScript into your application or SQL statements into your application and do some pretty nasty little things. So what the HTTP utility called HTML encode does is it strips out that capability and blocks things from happening. And then there's a little box at the top of page 46 which actually goes into that. And one thing that like somebody could do is they could hijack, the result of the page and, like, for example, send you to a different site, or as I mentioned before, get you triggering something that you don't necessarily want to trigger. So that's actually considered kind of like a standard procedure when working with form elements this way. And what this is ultimately going to do, if you ignore like the method calls, these two, is it's going to call in store, the controller, browse, the method, and then it's going to set the genre to whatever genre we passed in via text in the browser. And then when we're all done, instead of returning this pre-configured string here, what we are going to send back is the string called message that we just created above. And you got to get rid of that double quote there. All right? You can see everything had a couple of highlights there for a second, and they went away as soon as Visual Studio figured out how to work around those. Right. Now we're going to go ahead and save this, and let's go ahead and relaunch the application, and then we're going to give it a try. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to type in that whole line. And you know what? I'm noticing here in the code, and there's a typo in this little thing, but we're going to correct that when we get into the browser. Now, of course, this time the browser window is loading up on the other screen. So here it is coming back over. And don't worry about that. We're going to do this again. I'm hoping you didn't have that issue with yours, did you?
Nope, I didn't.
Right. It's only happening to the teacher. It's just par for the course. So we're going to try this again, but there seemed to have been some sort of a problem. So I'm not sure what triggered it, but I'm going to go launch it again. Now, for those of you that already have it running in the classroom, you can take and append to the URL, of course, store/browse $genre equals, and then type disco, and then it should echo back to you what genre you picked. So while we're waiting for mine to load up here again, I'm not sure what quite happened there, that it choked like that. But you see, I didn't just assume that there was something wrong with the code. I just tried it again. Now, if it does come up bad again, then we know there's some sort of an issue. I don't anticipate. We haven't done anything too tricky where it would be triggering errors at this point. All right, so there's the site up on the screen. I am, of course, going to append store/browse. Now, the question mark and the genre equals, I'm going to type something other than disco. I hope you guys don't mind. And then what you should get back is this. So that's just showing you that we took a snippet of text, fed it into our application to match up with the variable name that we created in the parameter call. And then that was stored in a variable, sanitized for JavaScript or any code injection, and then output back into the message as a variable and then put up on the screen. Pretty simplistic, and granted, most users will not be coming in and typing in a URL like that, but the point here is to demonstrate how it works. So most of this we're going to control programmatically or through form entry on the front end. And the reason we do it in the form of a get, at least at this point, is this is a pretty inane piece of information, really, right? Who cares what type of music style you're selecting here? So hopefully you see that as some sort of logic. So if you went, for example, to maybe a drop-down list in a menu and you made a selection, that selection might trigger this URL and then hypothetically take you to a page where now you're just have a filter that has you sorted through and put up all the jazz artists or all the disco or whatever, rock or whatever genre you choose. All right, let's go back over to the book. All right, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to change the details page. So we're going to bring up Visual Studio again, and let's see can we actually change this while the application is running. Have you guys tried this yet? What do you think? Do you think it's a good idea or not?
No, I don't think it's a
Yeah, it's probably not a good idea, but you know what? It doesn't mean that you shouldn't try, right? So I on purpose tried to show you that because this is a compiled application, I can't go changing the compiled code while it's running. You have to stop it, unfortunately, for as cumbersome as that is. Now, on some of these ASP.NET applications, and you guys may have figured this out already, some files can be edited. And those are ones that don't necessarily affect the compiled code. So think about what those might be. Maybe your HTML files, right? Or some of your CSS files. I wouldn't do it to JavaScript files. I think in general it's probably best not to make any changes while it's running, but that's something you learn the hard way. Now, in this previous example, we ended up passing in text, in the form of a get. Now we're going to throw in a numeric value, and because it's a numeric value, I don't necessarily have to attribute it to a value because it's not a text tidbit. So here I'm going to need to set up a parameter also. So I'm going to put in int, and we're going to call it ID. And because it's a number, it doesn't need any special buffering with like a long-winded URL. It can just drop the number in, just like you see here in the example. So kind of similarly to what we did above, I'm going to come over here, add a line, and we are going to put together a new message called message. And now interestingly, because we are working with a non-text field at this point, we don't have to worry about code being injected, so we can actually just go straight to creating the text. So I'm going to just say store.details, comma ID equals, and then we're going to concatenate to it whatever value we're passing, and we're closing that with a semicolon. So whatever we type into the URL at the end will be fed into this parameter call, and then that will come here and then be output to a variable called message, like so. Basically the same thing we did above, we're just doing it with a number now, folks. That's the only difference. Save your work, go ahead, hit the run button, and then hopefully this process will start to go a little bit faster. Now the web server is like up in memory, at least I hope. All right, and I'm getting a build error, so I got to figure out where's my build error. Okay, I see it already. You guys see it? Yeah, I put in a parenthesis and I didn't need it. So I have to hit stop. I should have saw that, right? Yeah, that's always the thinking. But you know what? That's the beauty of coding, folks. You just go in there, fix it, try again. This time, of course, it should work. Look like it succeeded. Here it comes up on screen number 2 for me again. Of course, I'm getting this message. Again, did this happen last time, and why did that happen? Let's just wait a second here. Now, of course, you know what's interesting about these modern browsers. I don't know if you keep watching where my pointer is right now, but Chrome has this like built-in script now, where if a page doesn't load, it just tries again in a little bit. And I'm gathering there's something that happened by me switching windows, like moving this from one browser window to another, that's making it fail. So I'm just going to come back and relaunch it. I think this time I'll let it load. It's going to the second window again, so I'm going to let it just load and then bring it over. I'm having a little bit of an issue where I have 2 different screen resolutions going here too, so. It is taking a little while, but it's not failing yet. So I'm just kind of giving you the verbal blow-by-blow here. Now it is loaded, so I'm bringing it back over. And now I'm going to go ahead and add the URL. All right, so we were going to do store, and this one was details, right? And then we were going to pass to it a numeric value. And you know what? It doesn't really matter what that numeric value. They use 5. You know what? I'm going to type in 4. So the point is it's an integer. It goes in. The value gets passed over through a variable, and then you're putting it up on the screen. Very simple mechanics, but important for our application development. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the browser window, terminate the application from running inside of Visual Studio, and we are moving on. And believe it or not, that actually completes the chapter for Chapter 2. So we are actually making okay progress here. Let's now terminate this video here, because I'm going to start a fresh video for the next chapter. And I'm going to go ahead and close my Visual Studio. I will be reopening it, obviously, but I want to close it to make a version of a completed Chapter 2. And so why don't I do that actually before I stop the video? Maybe that's a good thing to demonstrate. So I'm actually going to go back to my folders. I had to do a little bit of work here to make everything work correctly inside of Visual Studio. And I ended up having to create a new version here to make it all basically work copaesthetically is the best way I can say it. So inside this folder, this is the one that I was just most recently working on. It's just called MDC Music Store. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a copy of that. Paste it back in. And that's going to just take a few moments to complete. And then once that's complete, I will go ahead and rename that and call it Chapter 2 Complete. And then I have the peace of mind once again that I have a backup copy. Now if you were working on a local machine here in class, what you could do after the copy is made is you could zip it or not zip it, your choice, and then upload that whole structure back to your Google Drive so you don't have to walk around with a flash drive all the time. Of course, if you're on your own machine at home, you have it, but even there I would recommend that you consider having cloud storage as a backup. All right, and I think watching files copy at this point is kind of boring, so I'm just going to stop the video, but you guys, I think, get the point at this point, and how important it is to version your work. Video ends here.